Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. Tonight's webinar is not an upbeat topic, of course, but it's an important one. And in some respects, I think it's important for all of our families because even if your child is not actively suicidal or is not actively hurting themselves in classic self-harming ways, in many ways, many of our children share a similar trait or similar traits in that they are slowly killing themselves or they're being reckless with their behavior or they don't see the value in their own life. So with that idea, there can be ideas that as we kind of go to the edge of the extreme of somebody considering or even attempting to take their own life, we can pull back from that some of the lessons and wisdom. And I will tell you, it's a humbling topic to speak on because there's no topic that is more sensitive. I'll say this a little bit later on tonight, but I had a colleague tell me when I was writing my book, because I had a section in there, a part of a chapter about suicide, and a colleague encouraged me, if you're not going to say virtually everything that you can about it, which might include an entire book, then don't say anything about suicide because it's far too tender of a topic, especially for those who have struggled with it or who have suffered through it. So I want to say that humbly tonight as I broadcast this, that I recognize I'm not going to be able to say everything that needs to be said. Some of my wisdom comes from watching some of our clients over the years who have struggled with this. Some have come from, unfortunately, my experience of knowing people that have killed themselves and of talking to family members and even parents of those individuals. So with that respect for them and their wisdom, I bring it back to you, and hopefully it can be helpful. Let's start off with self-harm. Self-harm, of course, is some kind of active self-injury without necessarily the intent of suicidality. I'll talk about the correlation a little bit later, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is actively suicidal. That can include things like cuts and scratches, embedding objects in oneself, swallowing harmful objects, or putting other objects in one's body in a very self-destructive way, burning, hitting self-hitting objects, not attending to wounds or injuries. We've had students even try to use exposure in years past in some of our colder field areas to try to harm themselves. Um, and then ingesting objects that are not necessarily mood altering, but drugs as an attempt to hurt oneself, to get sick, to be delirious. And it can be a precursor or an indicator of suicidality. Like I said, those who are apt to self-harm are 9 times more likely to attempt suicide than those who aren't. So those are sobering facts, of course. What's the gain of self-harm? Why is somebody doing it? And I'll talk, I think, most importantly in a little bit about how we might respond to it to be most helpful. The primary gain when we talk about that in psychology is how does it reduce one's anxiety, or how does it give one a kind of an intrinsic feeling, something that we enjoy about it. Secondary gain is how does it affect other people? What's the relational benefit? And the simple examples, if I bite my fingernails, if I'm always biting my fingernails, the primary gain might be that I focus on that instead of whatever I'm anxious about. The secondary gain would be that I get attention from my parents or from others who are always telling me to stop it. So that's primary and secondary gain. The primary gains of self-harm include numbing. Some talk about it being soothing. And it's interesting because there's some primary gain, there's some benefits that seem to be opposite. And so it can be different for different people, or at least they explain it differently. Distracting, of course, or escaping, to feel something. I'm not feeling anything. That really is in some ways, along with feelings of powerlessness and helplessness, that is an important part of a lot of depression, right? That there's an absence of feeling. So by self-harming, I'm feeling something. And then I have a sense of control over the pain. So I can, the trauma or the pain that has happened to me is something that I can't control. But if I harm myself, it's something that I can control. Secondary gain, to communicate. That idea of getting attention. And I don't mean it in a kind of a superficial, manipulative way, but it gives a message to those that are watching me. And maybe it's because I don't feel heard. I feel impotent in my ability to express the pain, sadness, sorrow, helplessness, shame, whatever it is. I think that people won't hear it. Um, the idea of projective identification is another idea where I want you to feel the same kind of helplessness or powerlessness that I feel, right? If my parents observe this, they're going to feel the same feelings that I feel. That's not necessarily, in fact, I would suggest rarely, a conscious thought. But projective identification is an unconscious dynamic or pattern process where I get you to feel what I'm feeling, to distance myself from other people, right? To alienate myself from other people, to alienate other people from me. A lot of people are put off by this, and so this is my way of kind of pushing you away, of creating distance. Sometimes it's a passive attack on the parents. It's an anger directed instead of outward at the parents. It's an anger that gets directed inward. So it can be, if we listen with our ears, it can be something that we hear, the anger, right? The aggression. Imagine if somebody was trying to harm your child. In this case, it happens to be your child. But imagine if somebody else was trying to harm your child. There's no better way to harm you. So again, it can be the anger directed inward. And in a lot of ways, when we're dealing with somebody who's depressed, we try to get them in touch with that anger. We would rather see it go outward as long as it's not physically aggressive or dangerous. We'd rather see it be expressed outwardly. What are the signs of that somebody that you love might be self-harming? Wearing long sleeves at inappropriate times. Invisibility, that they're constantly off by themselves, right? Isolated. They hide from you. They're unwilling to show any part of themselves to you physically. Unexplained or odd explanation for wounds, bloody tissues, towels, or clothes. Oftentimes, it tends to escalate. You might not catch it early on, but eventually you will catch it. I've heard stories from parents in the past where after they saw a little bit, they ended up searching their child and find a whole bunch of cutting and scars. So eventually it does get out into the open. And then, of course, you find stashes of sharp objects or razors in their room or in other places. That can be a sign of it. It's not necessarily the same as suicidality. Even though there is that correlation, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to commit suicide. And that's something that a lot of them want their parents to hear. It can escalate, however. It has an addictive nature to it, a compulsive nature to it. And what that means is that they build up a tolerance, and it becomes, in the beginning, it might have been willful or conscious, but it becomes unconscious, something automatic. We talk about it in terms of what are the gains, but like a lot of addictive behaviors, after a while, you're not choosing it consciously. It's something that you're compelled to do. It becomes a habit. Sometimes they can put their lives at risk, not necessarily intentionally, but through self-destructive, self-harming behaviors. Even risky behaviors can be seen as self-harm. This can be something where it's an unfortunate outcome in those cases. The common threads between self-harm and suicide are escape and shame, right? It's an escape from pain. When Carl Jung said that neurotic behavior is a substitute form of legitimate suffering, he wasn't suggesting that mental health issues were not suffering, but that they were easier to suffer than legitimate, authentic suffering. And so in some ways, they both provide an escape. And at the core of it is shame, some kind of sense of I'm not good, I'm a burden, I'm bad, the world would be better without me. When I talk a little bit more about suicide toward the end, it is this idea that yes, depression is a part of it. Yes, substance abuse can be interwoven with suicidality, but ultimately it is that I'm a burden, that the world would be, I want to shrink, I want to disappear in the experience. And both both self-harm and suicide are replete with these themes. Self-harm, dangerous activities, reckless behavior, and suicide all have the common themes of escape and danger to themselves. And so we might not call the person who's abusing drugs, crack cocaine, heroin, opiates are, of course, at epidemic levels these days, alcohol. We might not think of those as suicidal, but there is still the deadening of self, right? The killing of self over time. Even cigarette smoking can be seen in some ways as self-harm. if we look at it through this lens. So when we're assessing suicidality, when we see somebody, when we are around somebody who's self-harming, we ask questions about their thoughts, about their plan, about their means. Do they have a plan? How would they do it? Do they have the means to carry out that plan? We ask them to rate it on a scale. We oftentimes will include them in a safety plan or a suicide plan if we at all believe, as therapists, I'm not just talking about wellness therapists, I'm talking about any therapist. If we believe at all that they are at risk, no matter what they say, we'll put them on some kind of suicide prevention plan where they'll be monitored. That is, we don't trust them necessarily to take care of themselves, but we're going to go to every length to ensure that they're not capable during this time to kill themselves. If the behavior continues without control, like I said, if it escalates, it can move into that suicide level of self-harm. How superficial are the injuries? I've had people shove knives into them, and not in a lethal way, but that's obviously more serious than slight scratching and so forth. And again, some people they're so tormented, they're toying with the idea of ending their life. So cuts around the inside of the arm, near the wrists, are kind of the person's experimentation with, I don't know if I want to live. I don't know if it's worth living. I don't know if I can endure this pain. I want out. And when I'm talking to people that are considering treatment, my question always is, are they willing to talk to a therapist? Are they willing to ask for help? Are they willing to be a part of the solution? And to the extent that they are, of course, we're less concerned about it. And to the extent that they are, or that they're shut down, or that they're not a part of the solution, of course, we're more worried about it. The mental health issues that are associated with both self-harm and suicidality are, of course, depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, personality disorders like borderline, dependent personality, histrionic personality disorder, are all associated with suicidality and self-harm. Eating disorders, PTSD and victims of trauma, not necessarily as common with people that are abusing substances. That's a way out, although it's not a rule out, but oftentimes that's their escape out of the pain. That's their ability to numb, their ability to not feel or authentically suffer. There can be gender identity, gender orientation, sexual orientation issues often. One of the things that I'll often ask, matter of fact, I ask it every time doing an initial interview, but if I'm talking to somebody in the context of the supervision that I do at Evoke, I'll ask them matter of factly if they are gay or lesbian, if they have ever fantasized, wondered about being another gender than the gender they were assigned at birth. Just now is so common, it's a matter of fact, because there's a high association with those. Because suicide and self-harm is an attack on who I am. Right? I'm not good. I'll talk a little bit more about this idea of attacking the self in just a moment. Perhaps most importantly is, how do we respond to it? Well, what's the most helpful response? The first thing I say is challenge your initial reaction. Most of the time, the initial reaction of any parent is going to be terror. You're very upset, sometimes angry or horrified. And we want to temper that as much as possible, right? Those are normal, real things, but can we respond as closely as we're absolutely possible to being curious? Can we respond with a listening mentality? What's going on? What's happening in there? We want to be as safe as possible. Nobody really is going to be able to respond to self-harm in a calm way. But if you know ahead of time, if that's something that's happened or something that you suspect, if you know that maintaining a calm demeanor means that you're going to be more safe and you're likely to get more information, right? The more terrified you are and then you react, the less safe you are. Welcome the disclosure and discovery as much as possible. Work toward that. Meaning that I'm glad I found out, or I'm glad you told me. That must have been a lot to hold on to. Kind of our typical responses are anger, want to talk them out of it, right? Again, being terrified or extraordinarily sad about it. So again, natural feelings, not the most helpful. That's why therapists can be more helpful because we are more differentiated. They're not our children, right? Watching my child cut is going to be a much bigger trigger for me than having a client who's cutting or burning themselves. And I've had many that have done both, not my own children, but clients. I can respond more like this. And so we have an advantage as therapists. Others have an advantage over me with regards to my children. Avoid as much as possible powerfully charged emotional reactions. The more you can kind of intellectually respond to it, the better. Reassure and affirm them that you're going to work with them. You're going to be there for them. You're going to help. Um, Learning to pay attention and check for wounds if this is a consistent problem. In the field, we do safety checks for people who have a history of self-harm. We ask to look in the typical places. If we find evidence of somebody that's self-harming, we'll ask to do, appropriately so with the right gender, we'll do a strip search because we can't trust that they're safe, because sometimes they'll cut, for example, on the upper inner thigh as a way to hide it from others. So in cases where we have the reason, the suspicion, and you would know about that if you were a parent of a child like that, we would tell you we're going to check medically everywhere. The consequences are safety. We're gonna do what we need to do to keep you safe. That's going to be the consequence. Ideally, we're going to respond with communication, with compassion and communication, where we're listening and understanding what's going on for you. What are you trying to say? If the cutting could talk, if the burning could talk, if the self-abuse could talk, what would it say? Again, ideally not anger. And in teaching them about it. Dialectical behavioral therapy, and I won't go into that in depth, but there's a lot about skills training, emotional regulation, mindfulness. Right? There's a lot of very basic facts that they can be educated on. A lot of dialectical behavioral therapy is about education. So educating them about that and how it can get out of control, and not assuming, again, because we talk about the motives, not assuming necessarily they have control over it. Same with an addict, a drug addict or an alcoholic. We can talk about why people start to drink or start to use drugs, but after a while, it's a compulsory activity. Listen as much as possible rather than talking or lecture. That's a really key piece. That's probably something that applies to most every situation, right? Themes often include not feeling understood, feeling invisible and alone, a lack of connection to others, impotent, powerless, and helpless feelings. Ask open-ended questions as much as possible, not just simple yes or no questions. How is it for you? What's going on? What are you feeling? What's it like? Like I said, what would you say if you could put it to words? And then try to make sense out of it. Even though in some ways, for some of us, for me included, self-harm in this traditional sense, I do sometimes risky things in my life. I do things, I had a motorcycle for years, and many people would say that that's safe or crazy. But in traditional self-harming ways, it's never really appealed to me. It's not been one of my escapes. And so for those of us, and that might be many of the parents on this broadcast tonight, it might not seem like your cup of tea. But see if you can make sense out of it from their perspective, because in some context, it makes perfect sense. So try to validate the drive, the feeling, the need, even if it doesn't make sense to you. In your conversations, try to, again, temper your emotionality. You'll notice that's on several of the slides where I talk about responding. Welcome the discussions. Visit them often. With a lot of our work, I think some of us are good at kind of these one-time drive-by kind of boundary setting or discussions, but it's important that we revisit it often, that you bring this up more than just once, and even promise that you're going to do it. Trying to give words to replace the feelings of behavior. If we can learn to feel, if we can unpack it, right? It's going to be hard to get rid of a compulsory behavior, but if we can unpack it and give it words, then we can take away the initial reason for doing it. We can learn to feel. Family therapy is important as a way to communicate, support, and focus on the identified patient. So even though I've done my own therapy for 18 years, through those with the same therapist, through those 18 years, I've also participated in family therapy with every one of my children, actually, at various points, some more than others, because that's a part of the healing, part of the communication, part of them getting supported in their relationship with me. You can own your feelings, own your reactions. You can talk about them, you can talk about how you're struggling, but own them is the key. Be pragmatic instead of threatening, guilting, and catastrophizing. Again, to layer on powerful emotionality is something that they're already overwhelmed with and can contribute to the shame. Because if they are hurting or terrifying somebody that loves them as much as you do, it can just build on that shame. I must be bad. This is another piece of evidence to show that I'm bad if I'm hurting the person that loves me this much. I listed some resources that were suggested by our therapists around the self-harm topic: cutting, Inside a Cutter's Mind, bloodletting, Skin Game, Get Me Out of Here, and you can go to the website to write love. It should be to write love on our arms. TWLOHA.com. Popular group that talks about self-harming and suicidality. Here's one of the main premises as I switch gears to suicide. This idea that was actually taught to me some years ago. The individual contemplating suicide is making a critical mistake. They are making the mistake of thinking that the whole self has to go, when in reality it's just part of the self that needs to die. The work is to find out what part of ourself needs to die and learning to kill it. For example, worrying about what other people think about me. I have to kill that part of me. Thinking that I am a burden if I ask for help. That part I have to kill. So the idea is to figure out what part of us needs to die and to kill that part of us. And after that, then we can be free and live a much more joyful life. So the mistake that a suicidal person makes is that the whole self needs to die, and it doesn't. And when they figure that out, they can be free. And it's a process. Like I said, somebody told me that don't say anything if you can't say enough. And I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to talk about this enough. But I can give some bullet points, and again, pull back from some of the people that have shared with me. The powerful correlation between shame and suicide. That's why we talk about it so much. That's why it's so important. I've talked about the example of Robin Williams when I was interviewed shortly after his suicide, and I was talking to colleagues about, was it the alcoholism that killed him? Was it the depression that killed him? One of my colleagues shared the opinion, and I agreed. It resonated with me. He said it was shame that killed him. I just watched the movie the other night, Wizard of Lies, with Robert De Niro and Michelle Pfeiffer, about the Bernie Madoff story. And so many people, after Bernie Madoff robbed them of their entire life savings, including people that Bernie was close to around him, so many people killed themselves because it was too much shame, right? I can't. What am I going to do as a father, as a provider, as a mother in this situation? So uncovering shame, and that's why it's so important that we become a helpful part of the response and responding in ways that don't encourage shame, that don't pour on shame. And I'm going to say this as simply as I can. It's why it's so important, and I talk about it all the time, that you don't give your feelings to your children. It's not their job to take care of them. But it is your job to go take care of them in some of the context. So then you can be there for the child or other person in a way where you can support them. But we think that if we tell our children how upset, how sad we are, that's going to motivate them to want to stick around or not hurt themselves for us, when really it can and often does tend to pile on the shame. People who have survived the suicide of a loved one, they talk about the amount of pain that a person must be in to be willing to be able to do something like that. And so the pain can be very, very severe. I've heard it described and compared to somebody, for example, jumping out of a burning building, right? The pain of staying inside the burning building is more, they know either way they're going to die, but the pain is too much. That's what it feels like to the person who thinks this is the solution. Of course, there's a hopelessness. There's a catch-22 in depression. There's a damned if you do and damned if you don't. And generally speaking, it can often go like this. If I am who I am, if I say what I think and feel, if I try to take care of myself, if I try to assert myself, it'll be miserable. It'll be hell. And if I don't try to be myself, express who I am, it'll be hell. So there's no way out. If I am who I am, I express who I am, I'm going to get punished. I'm going to be disliked. I'm going to upset the people that love me, disappoint people, frustrate people, whatever it is. But if I don't express who I am, then I'm going to be silently and desperately miserable. So again, as a therapist, you're trying to kind of find out where the lie that they're telling themselves is. And oftentimes it's this idea that some part of them is absolutely unacceptable. That can often be the case. But helplessness, hopelessness, catch-22, that can be a part of it for often. For parents, the parents that I've talked to that have survived it, their response is the way that they've made peace of it is a couple of ways. The pain was so severe. Their loved one is not suffering anymore. The awareness that they did everything they can. In one case, a couple of years ago, and I've shared this at times, a friend of mine took his own life, and he used to be a therapist who worked for us. And he had clients over the course of a long career who had also taken their own life. And I was in a text conversation with him for several days coming up to it. And even the morning of, 3 o'clock in the morning of, he texted me. I didn't get the text until later. But part of what gave me a peace of mind is I tried for not only the week, the days leading up to it, but for years to try to get him to get help, to try to get him to go to therapy, to try to get him to get support, and he wouldn't do it. So part of what I know that people have made peace with it, who can transcend it, is this awareness that you do everything they can. Why does the doctor, the old adage, the old idea, why does the doctor try to save somebody who's died long after the person has any realistic chance of coming back? And the reason is so they can go out and tell the loved one, we did everything we could. And that's something. I've even had parents whose children are actively suicidal who never actually committed suicide. I've had them talk about it. I have 2 people that I know right now that I've done some work with that have talked about it. Like, I know if they do it, it's the thing that has scared me more than anything, but I know that I've done everything that I can, which includes, for the people that I'm thinking of specifically, their work. Not only getting their child help, but their work. They've done their work and they're committed to doing their work, and they're trying every day to better themselves in the process. And again, you can only do what you can do. And you cannot stop somebody, ultimately, if they want to take their own life. I was planning on this broadcast this evening, and I was clicking on social media earlier today, and I saw that the wife of Chester Bennington, he was the lead singer for a band that was successful in the early 2000s, a band called Linkin Park, and he took his own life a few months ago. And it was a powerful post. She decided to post something very personal, the most personal post ever. And what it was a short video clip of her husband laughing with his children 36 hours before. And her tweet was about this idea that this is what depression looks like. This is the face of depression. Laughing and having fun with his son 36 hours before he took his life. And so there's this idea, like all of the stuff that I talk about, that we can absolutely prevent it. And there's something that is horribly humbling as a parent, that you can't. You can't prevent it. You can do what you can do. You can show up every day. You can do the heroic work of looking at yourself, of recognizing your contributions, realizing that you'll never get it perfect or never do everything, that needs to be done. You can forgive yourself. You can surrender. You can let go. And that's all that you can do in this process. So I don't want that to be more terrifying, more frightening, but offer, and those who have been through it, those who are struggling with it or have struggled with it, they know this. They've told me this. Those who have suffered through it and those who are suffering from suicide threats and attempts, sometimes in many cases, very chronic suicide attempts. If you have resources, I tell the parents that I work with, call 911. It's better to overreact than to underreact. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 800-273-TALK. There's an LGBTQ or LGBT hotline, lifeline that you can also call. So many young people struggle with, again, sexual orientation, sexual identity, the shame around it, the acceptance of it. I have a non-binary child. Non-binary means that they don't identify as completely male or female. One of my children is non-binary. And they've told me, they prefer the pronoun they and them. They've told me that so many of their friends who are struggling with it are suicidal and self-harming because their parents are, in some cases, of course, angry and shaming about it because they can't accept it, but sometimes just confused and overwhelmed by it. And one of the things that my own child has said that is their greatest happiness in this whole process is our ability, willingness to be open, to accept them for who they are. So that can be a specific niche for many. The crisis teen text line, text the word listen to 741 I did that wrong. Sorry. No, it's 741-741. Take home. Challenge your initial reaction to self-harm. That's a big important piece. To be helpful is the goal, of course. Learn about and ask about dialectical behavioral training and certification for your child. If there's if self-harming or suicide threats or attempts or thinking is a significant part of it. Read books, get support from people who have been through this. Go to therapy so that you can have a place where you're going to take care of yourself. Go to support groups for family members of borderline personality disorder, which is one of the disorders that is so associated with self-harm, or addicts, or support groups that are for self-harm. Practice self-care. Don't give up on your life. Again, it might not be conscious, but when you give up on your life, when everything is wrapped up in your child and you suffer when they suffer, on a one-to-one basis, right? For every measure of suffering, you suffer the same. That's not the burden that they want. They want to know that you're okay. They want to know that their pain, that their disorder, that their disease, that their humanity doesn't cost the person who loves them the most, which is you, to suffer. So make sure you're taking care of yourself at the same time. All right, I'm happy to take any live questions. One parent writes, I had a period of time in my life when I was suicidal. The most significant memory I have was that my dreaming and planning about suicide was very self-soothing and comforting. It was almost euphoric. Can you address that, please? I share the same experience with you. There was a time in my life where I wasn't actively suicidal, but the fantasy of not being here anymore. I never made a plan or would do it because of what it would do to my family, to others that love me. But I fantasized about the escape. So the fantasy of disappearing, the fantasy of death, becomes kind of a temporary escape. I share that experience often with my clients who have struggled with it, or parents whose children have struggled with it. It is a fantastic escape. Unfortunately, the pain doesn't go away. It just moves to the person who's suffering from it and kind of spreads out amongst all that love them. So you don't really get to get rid of the pain. You just transfer it to other people in the process. You definitely don't talk about it in terms of it being selfish. That's something that people respond to. They talk about people that have committed suicide as selfish. I don't know what your spiritual backgrounds are, of course, but we don't find that to be helpful. Again, it's another very shaming message. It's a strange thing to try to shame somebody who has a symptom that is rooted in shame out of it. It doesn't work that way. And the person that's often suicidal, that's part of the catch-22. If I take care of myself, I'm selfish. But if I don't take care of myself, I'm living in a quiet, miserable, isolated life. So don't talk about it in terms of selfishness, please. Our son wrote 3 letters to each of his close friends toward the end of his stay at Evoke. He is 14 and quite honestly spoke about his anxiety, depression, and that he attempted to take his life twice during the last school year. He asked us to give those letters to them, and we, with the help of our Evoke therapist, held the letters. We asked our son to really consider that it is something he really wants out there. I am very conflicted. He wants to connect to his close friends about what he has been going through, but that is a lot for a 14-year-old friend to deal with. Do you have any suggestions on how to handle this? I first trust, of course, the wisdom of your therapist at Evoke who's working with you and with your son. I think it's okay to slow it down. I think it's absolutely okay to slow things down. Children will expose themselves to potential damage at times. And so I'm conflicted too with that because part of it is honoring what they're requesting, but part of it is kind of running it through your adult parent filter and considering that we look at this a different way or that we ask questions. So I would say I think it's wise to slow it down. Wise to ask them to reconsider. I would say, the conversation's not over. We may do this, but we want to have a discussion with you first about this, and you with your therapist, and so forth and so on. So I like exactly the track that you're on. And at some point, it might be something for people. One of the things that happens for suicide in schools and for teenagers is it's contagious. That's the unfortunate piece of it. A lot of you in your communities, you know this. There can be a rash of suicides that happen, even similar ways. They see the attention and the love and the outpouring, and from social learning theory, we learn it reinforces it. When somebody dies, there's an outpouring of love and attention that is genuine and beautiful. And it can leave those left behind who are struggling with depression. That again, it reinforces the idea in them. So we want to be, it's a difficult and complex issue. We want to be careful of how much we talk about it, how much we attend to it, and how much attention we give it. So I would say, again, deferring to your therapist first, but sounds like you're being very wise and rolling this out slowly and keeping the discussion going. I think if you just shut it down and said no, I don't think that would be a good idea. If you just did it without thinking because he was requesting it, I don't think that'd be a great idea. But talking about it and slowing it down, I think is a wonderful, wonderful balance. I'll take any other questions in a moment. Let me go through the upcoming events slide. We want all parents, and that includes parents whose children struggle with self-harm, self-sabotage. We want all parents to attend 6 12-step support groups while your child is with us. We think of, when I'm announcing these things, I think of these as essential to create an optimal outcome. Following us on social media can also be a part of that because of the resources, announcements, articles, and access you get to therapeutic support and even connection with other parents and clients at times. All of our podcasts are available to the public. So on iPhone, you can listen to them by going to your podcast app and searching Evoke Therapy Programs. If you have an Android device, download the SoundCloud app and search Evoke Therapy Programs. By the way, the SoundCloud app also works on an iPod too, but your iPod has it built in. On Twitter and Instagram, follow us by searching @Evoke Therapy. Facebook, search Evoke Therapy Programs. The Second Nature Alumni Foundation on Facebook is also an organization you connect to. It's for families who can't afford therapy. So opportunities to serve, raise money, donate money are there. The Evoke Therapy blog, of course, another one just came out today from one of our wonderful field staff. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon. Go to the alternative purchasing options. The Amazon warehouse is out, but the book is available if you click on the paperback and go to other purchasing options. You can buy new copies that are sold there. There are many still available there, many. You can also buy an audio version or electronic version. The Parent Alumni Foundation book page through the Amazon Smile program A percentage of the proceeds go toward people who can't afford therapy. Upcoming workshops, we ask all parents, if at all possible, to attend one of these. If you're an Entrada family, you can go to Cascades and vice versa. You can connect it to a field visit if it's at your program and if your therapist thinks it's the appropriate timing. The next one is September 23rd and 24th, so it's upcoming. Please email gail@evoketherapy.com for more information. The next Finding You intensive, these are run by a therapist, currently run by me, for individuals, 6 people, 7 people. So very intensive work, family of origin work, psychodrama work, mindfulness training, connecting what's gone on in your life and the raw emotion is there to what's going on in your relationships today. Finding You for any individual. Doesn't even have to have a child in our program. Nearly half of the participants haven't had a child in our program. It could be related to a child issue, any relationship issue, or your own struggle around general codependency, anxiety, depression, trauma. October 18th through 21st is the next one that's open. Also, private family intensives are available. Excuse me. Got a tickle in my throat. All right. Upcoming parent support groups. I think we're full, but I want to tell you about these parent support groups. In Los Angeles, I think we're full. Bay Area, Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York City, and Toronto upcoming, of course, are not full. Andrea@evoketherapy.com. The opportunity to visit with other families, to look other adults in the eyes who have been through this process, to connect to them, to network, to get support, to learn is invaluable. And we can't do this, of course, in every city. So if you have these opportunities in a city near you, and if you do live in a city and you do want to request it, and you can help us get more attendance through friends, through your education consultant, through any means, we're happy to try to make it there. But these cities that we visit regularly, please take the opportunity if you possibly can. And in Los Angeles, we do it on a Sunday to help with traffic. I'm going to do that also in New York. I'm gonna move that date. I'm gonna move it to. It's gonna be Sunday the 29th. We're gonna do it on Sunday the 29th, I believe. And then of course we have the Bay Area upcoming next Monday. Pursuits are trips that are available all over the country and internationally. They just finished a wonderful, wonderful 17-day trip up to Nepal. Mindfulness and meditation and service, fantastic. Can be for families or young adults. Sober fun, therapy light. Can be a very spiritual experience. My father committed suicide, another parent says. He was terminal, and when his quality of life was less than he could tolerate, he ended his life. I felt your comment about others saying it is a selfish thing was right on. I struggled with this spiritually for some time, and a man from my church helped me through it. 2 of my children struggle with self-harm and suicide thoughts and gestures. My daughter is now 4 months clean while at aftercare now. She works hard at this and still gets the urges. Thank you for talking about this tonight. It was very helpful. I want to say something about that because I want to just emphasize this selfish idea. I don't use that word when I'm doing therapy. Everything that we do is an attempt to feel better. We start drinking alcohol for the same reason we stop, to feel better. We cut to feel better. You know, when a client asks me, what's in it for me? Some people think, well, that's very self-interested, but that's the best answer, right? I wouldn't present anything to clients if I didn't think it could give their life more richness, more meaning, more satisfaction. It might be hard in the short run, but I think you're absolutely right. I think taking judgment out of it is critical. It's not the paradigm of mental health to be judgmental. And sometimes I hear therapeutic approaches hide behind therapeutic language, very thinly masking judgment, just because they couch it in graduate school words and terms and phrases. It doesn't disappear. That's why labels, we have to be careful of labels and what we say about people. And when we use diagnoses even as insults, it doesn't do anything for the person hearing that. So thank you for that. Without shaming, it is helpful to remind and discuss how much his loved ones care, love and accept him, and what losing him would mean to be siblings. Oh, so it's a question. Is it helpful? Sorry, without shaming, is it helpful to remind and discuss how much his loved ones care, love, and accept him, and what losing him would mean to siblings? I think you can say that very. What I said is don't layer on the shame. But we would miss you. We love you. But here's what's important, and it goes on to say, seems expressing that one can remind him that others value him in the world, or does that put more shame on him? It's not that. No, you can talk about loving and wanting, absolutely. And I'm sorry if I led you to hear that you can't talk about that. But it's got to be more than that, and it's got to be that I embrace this discussion, and that I'm not overwhelmed by it, and that yes, the losing you would be a wound from which I would never fully recover, and it's because I love you, and I want to have this discussion, and I can take care of myself, and I can be okay. And we demonstrate that, we communicate that, not just in the verbiage that we use in that discussion, but in everything we do with our own self-care. We demonstrate that when we avoid phrases like, I would do anything and everything for you, or I do everything for you. It's not true. It's not possible. It's more important to say, I can take care of myself. I can be okay. Yes, I would grieve. Yes, I love you. But you want to communicate that you're capable of taking care of yourself so they don't have to. So express love, express care, concern, but demonstrate love in your capacity to be there for them. Demonstrate it by doing the heroic thing of looking at and inside of yourself and of taking care of yourself. Demonstrate it by managing the absolute horror that it is for anybody to hear about a child who wants to end their own life. Demonstrate that by going to take care of it in therapy or in Al-Anon. Thank you for that, and I'm glad you asked me to clarify that. It's an art. But it's clear. Listening to it, I can hear it, and it's hard to give you kind of a how-to or not. It's just you don't layer it on them. You don't give them more responsibility. Communicate clearly, but also take the burden off of them. I hope that helps. All right, folks, we're going to have another webinar. Not today. That's today's date. I didn't have these slides proofread this evening, so that's why there's been a couple of typos, including this one. The next one will be this Wednesday the 20th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. I haven't decided on the topic yet. I did write an email to all of our therapists today asking them for suggested books for me to share with you all on the webinar. So if any of you have those, you can also send those to Andrea@evoketherapy.com. All right, folks, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks for the helpful point of contact. Thanks for those of you who shared. And I'm told also that we do have 2 to 4 more in Los Angeles. I'm also told that Wednesday night is the start of Rosh Hashanah. I'm sorry about that. I can't do Tuesday and can't do Thursday. So for those of you who will be celebrating and won't be watching, you can watch the archived webinar later. So I apologize for that, but just with my schedule, that's the only other night that I can do it this week. All right, folks, have a great week. Let us know if you want to go to the LA meeting. If you have the opportunity, if you live in the Southern California area, strongly encourage you to attend, and in any of the areas where we are currently doing parent support groups. Have a great evening. Hope this is a helpful point of contact. Good night. Bye-bye.